I believe the two historiographical clues about how Iurlionis encountered theosophy are Stabrauskas and Flammarion. Then, of course, we may have many clues in his paintings, but here it's difficult, I believe, and even more difficult for me. I'm not an art historian, to determine what in Iurlionis comes from theosophy, possibly what comes from Lithuanian folklore, or perhaps even from Japonism, as we just heard. So here, for instance, you have Thoughts, possibly 1907, and what is this? We can say, as some have argued, it comes from the Dainos, from the popular poems of Lithuanian folk culture, but it can come also, of course, from esoteric ideas. And here, that I believe has already been discussed, is Andante in the Sonata of the Stars. You see a pyramid, you see the Milky Way, you see birds, you see other things, and all these themes, like the Milky Way, the pyramids, they are discussed in theosophical literature, but they are not discussed only in theosophical literature. So we don't know if theosophical literature is the direct source. Muse, of course, very famous painting, has been widely interpreted as an affirmation of reincarnation, or at least the pre-existence of human souls. And it's true, Iurlionis was interested in these themes. He wrote to Sophia, our beginning is somewhere in the infinity, before all ages, a very long time ago, and definitely not once. We have already changed our form, but the memory is weak, and to recall it requires extraordinary concentration. So it's sure he was interested in his themes, but you know, Iurlionis very rarely explained the meaning of his paintings. So to interpret these paintings as the soul capture between one life and the other is very suggestive, but I believe we cannot be 100% sure. Now, I myself born under the sign of Gemini, so I particularly like this painting. And of course, the crossing of the abyss we have just discussed in the Sonata of the Serpents, but it's here there is another abyss and another crossing in this Gemini in the zodiac cycle. And Gemini are twins. So here, if you want, again, we can see a very theosophical idea that we have twin souls, but it's difficult to find. So we have to cross the abyss, perhaps. Angels, of course, if you look at theosophical literature, it's chock full of angels, and Iurlionis very always depicted angels. And one argument, these angels are more theosophical than Christian, is they appear alongside non-Christian symbols. Here again, we have another possibly theosophical angel. And then we have this conception of the deity in Rex, which has been interpreted in so many different way. According to Kashokas, for instance, the light-colored unit comprising the planet Earth and Rex is enclosed by a bigger image of a second Rex. So this may not be Orthodox theosophy, but it's not Christianity either, and has a certain theosophical flavor. And then one interest of Iurlionis, as we know, was the creation of the world. And he wrote, I have had the idea of painting it, meaning the creation of the world, all my life. This is the creation of the world, only not ours according to the Bible. but some other fantastic word. So this panel, which may be the second and the first in the series creation of the word, may convey the quite theosophical idea of original field of energy spreading through the first movement of the universe, which of course also recalls Flammarion. Now, a favorite theosophical theme is Atlantis, and Atlantis has been located everywhere in the late 19th century. There are some Italians saying even Atlantis was in Italy. I have written about Costa Rican theosophists, and they were persuaded Atlantis was in Costa Rica. So Atlantis has been in Japan, has been located almost everywhere. And Iurlionis, we went the first day, some of us, to the Raigardas Valley, which he painted in an exceptionally beautiful way in the triptych. And even in some information packages for tourists in Druskininkai, I picked up some years ago, there is this legend that in the Raigardas Valley once stood a large city, a quote from a touristic brochure, later swallowed into the earth. So that story is in a way another version of the Atlantis story. And then pyramids, of course, we can see even different planes of beings, pyramids of the past, pyramids of the present, pyramids of the future, pyramids everywhere. And starting from Blavatsky, Theosophy has a lot of discussions about pyramid, but again, not only Theosophy. So it may be Theosophy and maybe some other source. Here, Kashokas even sees the ruin of the castle of Vilnius, but I believe what is interesting here is the pyramid are not something of the past. They are a real force interacting with us. And since I'm a scholar of new religious movements, let me mention the pyramid of Merkine, not very far from here, which is a center of alternative spirituality built in 2002 by Povilas Šekas, Bob Hai, and some Lithuanian colleagues, particularly Milda Lišauskienė, and we have published on the pyramid. We have been there, seen what kind of people, quite a few people went there at least before COVID. It would be like 15 minutes from here, from where we are now. Now, when we interviewed Povilas Šekas, he knows, of course, the Lithuanian who Čiurlionis was, but he doesn't know very much about Čiurlionis. However, his mother, who is an amateur painter, knows about Čiurlionis. But Povilas Šekas would say he built the pyramid because he had a revelation from God, not because of Čiurlionis, but you see here this modern incarnation of the theme of the pyramid, coincidentally in the region of Druskininkai in Lithuania. Now, the fairy tale of the the kings is, of course, a painting representing Lithuania. Čiurlionis himself says represented the radiance of Lithuanian culture, which is called by history to say its words. But of course, paintings always have different layers of meaning, and you can also see here a movement from darkness to light, which in this case will be a theosophical theme. So, what I believe we cannot argue is that the Theosophy was the only influence of Čiurlionis. Surely was influenced by different movements, phenomena, ideas. For instance, he was influenced by Lithuanian folklore, at one stage Lithuanian nationalism. He was influenced by the philosophy of Wilhelm Wundt. He was influenced by Japanese art, as we just heard, particularly Hokusai. He was influenced by symbolism, particularly Böcklin. And so there are a number of influences of Čiurlionis, and Theosophy through Stabrauskas and Flammarion is one of them. So Čiurlionis didn't produce theosophical art in the sense that Jean Delville or Mondrian, particularly in the pre-abstract period, or Lauren Harris or Hilma af Klint produced theosophical art, in the sense of an art which directly illustrates theosophical concepts. Here you see, for instance, what one can mean for theosophical art stricto sensu. It's a painting by Jean Delville called The Three Kumaras, which are part of Blavatsky's cosmology. They are rulers of the world. And so here you have an important painter who was also the leader at one stage of the Theosophical Society in Belgium, which clearly tries to convey in a painting theosophical concepts. Now, in this sense, there is nothing similar in Čiurlionis, while we can have parallels, for instance, in the theosophical, so-called theosophical triptych of Mondrian, that's still the figurative Mondrian. And Mondrian was at the time, but he really remained until the end of his life an active member of the Theosophical Society. Or some paintings by Lauren Harris, the greatest Canadian painter. He also was a very active member of the Theosophical Society, even had a missionary radio show to try to persuade people to join the Theosophical Society. Hilma af Klint, of course, the temple paintings, and even Stabrauskas, some painting you can connect much more directly to his activities as a leader in the Theosophical Society. So that was not the case of Čiurlionis. There is no painting explicitly illustrating theosophical text. However, Čiurlionis may have been, in my opinion, was influenced by some theosophical concepts. But there is a fascinating problem, and one also discussed in the book by Professor Andrijauskas, and in the writings of Čiurlionis we have, and of course there are writings we do not have, including journals, we can find mentions of Flammarion, but Blavatsky is nowhere to be seen, and also there is no description Čiurlionis left to us or accessible to us of his experiences in the circle of Stabrauskas. Now, these experiences we know were very important, but we have no written testimony. So we can have different explanation for this. One explanation is Čiurlionis regarded these experiences as very intimate and very private, so he didn't want to commit it in writing. And another explanation is he did write something, but this something was hidden or destroyed, which takes us back to the political questions, that to connect Čiurlionis with Theosophy would have been detrimental to the image of Čiurlionis, not now, of course. Now the connection between Theosophy and artist is very much accepted. Just 2 weeks ago, I was in New York at the exhibition of the making of Kandinsky at the Guggenheim, and it's very clear Theosophy is everywhere. few weeks after I did a video documentary with the Guggenheim Venice on their Biennale exhibition on surrealism and magic, which is really surrealism and esotericism. And here they talk very freely about the connection of surrealist artists with different occult organizations, theosophy, Gurdjieff, which will not have happened during the life of Peggy Guggenheim. She was not very liberal towards mentioning this connection. So now it's not a scandal, but as I have mentioned, both in the Soviet Union and in the West, for different reasons, to associate artists with theosophy or other esoteric movements was regarded as detrimental to the fame of the artist and dangerous. So one possibility is he never wrote about his mystical occult experiences, and another possibility is somebody destroyed what or hidden in a way we have not recovered for this political reasons. So we may never know, or perhaps some new documents will one day surface. I don't know if this matter will ever be settled. So what I could do in this very simple speech was to present a sort of recognition of the state of the art on the question of iurlionis and theosophy, but surely it is a question which needs further exploration and has not been to this day fully solved. Thank you. No, it's surely new because my point is he could not have attended for years these meetings with Stabrowska. Stabrowska is the leading figure in Polish theosophy. So it's unconceivable he didn't absorb something from Stabrowska's and the other people he met in Stabrowska's circle. So this is clear, and I believe we had in this conference some very nice paper from the showing the intuitions of iurlionis, which surely we can infer from the paintings themselves. But the historiographical question that remains is that to be sure about exactly what influences is regarded as important, we would like to have something in writing from him. And it's very possible, as you say, that something in writing existed and was destroyed. I believe Professor Andrzejowska also considered this possibility. And my point only, I have read quite a few Lithuanian scholars writing about iurlionis and theosophy or spiritualism. What I may supplement to Lithuanian scholars is they focus very much on the problem in the Soviet Union. Because in the Soviet Union, theosophical art was bourgeois, anti-socialist art, so they tried to hide. And we may also remember all the problems Malievich had with Stalin, because Malievich, on the one hand, he was hailed as great Soviet artist, but at one stage he was told that his allusion to theosophy and spirituality should eliminate. And among the pupils of Malievich, there is this can be the truth or can be folk tale that he was honored by very nice future, but perhaps he was poisoned. We don't know whether it's true, but this story about Malievich is very much retold by his pupils that he was poisoned by order of Stalin. So he could not do more damage. He was still great Soviet artist, but let's put him in a nice grave, so he cannot. It was too much unpredictable. Of course, we don't know whether it's true or it's just a legend created by the pupils of Malievich. So it was very dangerous to have this connection in the Soviet Union. That's true. But it was also dangerous in the West. Of course, nobody will kill you, but still you can be punished by the art establishment and the galleries. And as I say, they wrote an article on Ringbom. And the Ringbom story is paradoxical because Ringbom was an atheist. He didn't believe in any spiritual idea. But he did this dissertation not claiming that the spiritual world existed because he didn't believe in it, but he claimed that Kandinsky believed in a spiritual world. And that created a horrible reaction. He surely compromised his career. And he got his chair, but for 20 years he had to write only about Finnish medieval art. And the family of Kandinsky reacted happily, not by burning documents, but by closing the access of the documents to scholars. And only after 30 years from the book by Ringbom, the access to the Kandinsky archives, including, and Kandinsky archive, he did write down his experiences. For instance, Kandinsky wrote down he had experience of telepathy or parapsychology, but we know this now because in the case of Kandinsky, the family and the art galleries representing him, they tried to hide. Happily, they didn't destroy. So now these documents are accessible. So what I'm trying to say is not only in the Soviet Union, but even in the West, there was this bias. And this can go on about Mondrian. I mean, the Greek scholar of Mondrian wrote in his book Theosophy was not very important for him. And when it came out, a letter Mondrian wrote shortly before dying, saying, all my art comes from the sacred doctrine of Blavatsky. You see that the art establishment was very much tried to put under the table on this stuff because it was suspicious. Mm. 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 Yeah, I have heard this theory before, but I also believe that's part of criticism of theosophy, which I don't totally share, because we should remember that the theosophy was co-founded, but because there was also Colonel Olcott, but really founded by a woman, Madame Blavatsky. And then when Madame Blavatsky dies, there is for a few years Colonel Olcott, but then there is a long reign as president of the Theosophical Society and main theoretician of Annie Besant. Now, Annie Besant is not only a woman, but is a famous exponent of the British feminist movement. So in the history of theosophy, women are very important. And also, I would say, in the theosophical tradition, there is very much the idea that wisdom Sophia is actually feminine, and that the future Messiah can be female. That was particularly developed, le Messio féminin, by the French theosophists, including Flammarion. So we have a sort of feminist trend within the theosophical tradition, and of course we have also female artists interested in theosophical themes. We have Hilma Klint, we have Leonora Carrington, and on and on. So I wouldn't say that theosophies are patriarchalist organization, although some theosophists may have had patriarchal ideas, but not Annie Besant. Annie Besant was a feminist. Yeah, of course. Now you have in the United States the movement of women of destiny supporting Trump, for instance. So you can have female movements everywhere. There is even a female Nazi organization. But if we talk about Annie Besant, Annie Besant was kind of left-wing feminist. She spent many years of her life, for instance, advocating for free contraception, which is not typically a patriarchalist or right-wing idea. I can give you another example of prominent theosophist in Italy, Maria Montessori. Maria Montessori was persecuted by Mussolini, and she decided to go to India and to work at the headquarters of Theosophical Society in Ajar. And again, the ideas of Maria Montessori on education, but also on sexuality, were quite progressive. So we cannot compare Montessori or Besant to the Nazi women or women of destiny for Trump. I mean, they were classical feminists with kind of left-wing political ideas. Another example, Lithuanian, maybe Eva Kuhn. She left the Theosophical Society for question about sexuality. Eva Kuhn was the wife of Giovanni Amendola, a politician killed by the fascists, and the mother of a prominent Italian communist leader. And she was the Lithuanian theosophist, and she was extremely left-wing. So we can, of course, not, as I say, compare to sort of reactionary feminism in the Nazi era or now in the Trump circle. Yeah, very shortly, because I believe we have another two papers. Marco Pasio is a friend of mine, teaches at the University of Amsterdam, and created a typology of the relationship between theosophy and the arts. And one typology is illustrators, and that would be, for instance, the first significant theosophical artist, Reginald Macro. He was British, and he moved to the theosophical community of Point Loma in United States, and he became an employee of this splinter branch of Theosophical Society. So he was, some of the paintings are beautiful, but he was employed to illustrate theosophy. But this is very rare, because when we have committed members of the Theosophical Society, but all of them say we do not always paint the theosophical, we only occasionally, I mean, Mondrian, we can find 2-3 paintings, and then there are hundreds where he doesn't paint, even if he was very active member of the Theosophical Society. Same on Lawrence Harris. Lawrence Harris was sort of theosophical missionary, but he said very clearly, when I paint, I very rarely touch theosophical themes. Again, there is 1 or 2 paintings when he did this semi-abstract Canadian landscapes, where you can find some theosophical theories, but you need an effort. And when you have, and I will put in this category Iurlionis and Kandinsky, artists who had some influences from theosophy, well, Kandinsky said itself in the spiritual in art. So we know Kandinsky, we know because he wrote down that he went to the lecture of Rudolf Steiner. He was reading the Delville, even Delville is very different painter. So these artists like Iurlionis or Kandinsky, theosophy was a part of their experience, and we can find hints or traces in their paintings, but it's, as you say, an indirect rather than a direct relationship.
Juliau, ar jūs galėtumėt paklausti, įsijungęs mikrofoną? Ar girdite?
Ar girdit mane?
Girdim.
Čia pas mane su mikrofono problemos, bet girdisi, taip? Tai gerai. Dear Massimo, I just wanted to say a comment and ask a question. And my comment is that I think a year or 2 ago, I heard of, it was the first time I read something that you wrote, and for me it was like a fresh breeze of air. I really liked the way you approached theosophy in Iurlionis, and today it was also very interesting, and there is a lot of I can learn from this, like the precision, like not speculating. So this is very good. But so thank you, really appreciate it. And the question I wanted to ask is very simple. Why is that you are interested in theosophy, and especially in theosophical aspect in Iurlionis?
I'm a scholar of new religious movements and of esoterical movements. So I have written on all sorts of new religious movements, from Theosophy to Rosicrucians to, say, the Jehovah's Witnesses. And the new generation of scholars of new religious movements very much specialized. They would write only about theosophy, or only say about the Jehovah's Witnesses, or the Hare Krishna. But my generation, it's an old generation, and we had this sort of a broader approach, which also allowed for comparative books of all sorts of religious, spiritual, esoteric movements outside of the mainstream. So my last 4 books published directly in English. One is a massive book on called Satanism, a Social History, so it's on satanic movements. But then there is one on the Plymouth Brethren, who are a fundamentalist a Protestant group. Then one on the Church of Almighty God, which is the Chinese new religious movement. And the last one is called Sacred Eroticism, on sex magic movements, particularly in Eastern Europe. So as you see, is a broad approach. And but your question is very interesting because theosophy was sort of peripheral academic subject. There was a journal in the United States, there still exists, called the Journal of Theosophical History, created by James Santucci, Professor James Santucci, but always it had very few subscribers. And I believe that the people who put theosophy again in the academia in a prominent position were really art historians. Particularly one very prominent art historian, now we have met several times, we have collaborated in the United States, called Linda Darlington Henderson, and she wrote some voluminous books on theosophy and the origins of modern art. So at one stage, I believe it started like 10 years ago, 10, 15 years ago, we started understanding that there was a new angle, and new religious movements, particularly theosophy, spiritualism, and Rosicrucianism, but to some extent Christian Science. And if we look at the cutting edge postmodern art, even the Church of Scientology, which includes a number of artists, not only movie stars, also visual artists, we started realizing that what we were studying as a sociologist or historian of new religious movements was also being studied by art historians or art critics. So we started interacting, starting with a project which still continues through the Guggenheim exhibition. This project was called Enchanted Modernity, and there was a series of conferences. I attended 2, one at University of Amsterdam and one at Columbia University in New York, but there was a third one I didn't attend in Utah. And this project was financed by the British government, was a great project which put together scholars of new religious movements and art historians and art critics. And so we discovered that what we believed was our small niche of new religious movement was actually of great interest to art historians, because movements comparatively small, such as the Theosophical Society of the Rosicrucians, had a very large influence on the very genesis of modern art.
I don't know if I started to have more questions. If it's okay, I'll just ask one more quick question related to what you, if we still have a few minutes. My question is then, since you were interested in such a variety, and it seems like there was no particular preference, so what are you actually trying to find in all those religious movements? Or in other words, Blavatsky says there is no religion higher than truth. So how do you discern the truth there?
You know, I was trained as a sociologist of religion to use a method called methodological agnosticism. So to bracket the question of truth, but this method should be understood, because some sociologists at one stage in the 1970s, 1980s, they believed that meant that theology is not important. On the contrary, theology is very important, because to discuss a religious movement without studying theology is like to discuss a car or the automobile industry without studying the engine. And so you don't understand why exactly this car is sold to somebody. So we do study theology, but what we don't do is to say whether a theology is true or false. In other words, I write a book about Church of Almighty God, which is a large million-member Chinese religious movement who believes their founder is a new female incarnation of Jesus. So I try to understand their theology, I talk with them, I read their sacred books, but nowhere in my book published 2020 by Oxford University Press called Inside the Church of Almighty God, nowhere in my book I say whether their theology is true or false, because I believe the sociologists of religion should bracket this question. But that doesn't mean I should not describe their theology, because their theology is the very reason that people, or the main reason, people join the movement. So I always try to reconstruct the theology of each of these movements, and of course to reconstruct how they interact with society, their problems. But I don't pass a judgment whether their theology is true or false. Then, of course, like everybody, I have my personal opinions, but I try not to express these personal opinions in my books or articles as scholar. So sometimes this is perceived as strange by people I interview. Everybody says, why don't you convert to my religion? But I would have converted to 50 or 60 in writing books about them, so I prefer not to convert to anyone.
I noticed this was really good, the way you don't reveal your personal attitude to this, and this worked very well as a method. This is something that I would like to learn from you. Thank you very much for your answer.
Thank you.
Massimo. Thank you.